Hello there! Welcome to Being a Better Tank, a guide to tanking. My name is Tuskeh, and in this video we're going to discuss what you can do, regardless of your skill level, class or experience, to help you become a better tank. It doesn't really matter what expansion this is, what patch it is, or what class you're playing as. There are some fundamental things that all tanks should keep in mind. This isn't really a beginner's guide, but if you have even the most basic knowledge of the game, you should be good to learn from this video. So, before we discuss some tips, let's perform the most important part of tanking, getting into the mindset. All three roles in this game are different, and it's important that you don't let aspects of being a damage dealer or a healer bleed over into your mindset as a tank. Just note, however, that this is very different from using your experience as a damage dealer or a healer to make yourself better. You should do that, but for now we're not discussing that. No, this is all about mindset for the time being. Alright, so you are a tank. Either you're a Blood Death Knight, a Brewmaster Monk, a Protection Paladin, a Guardian Druid, or a Protection Warrior. Or whatever classes have been released since I recorded this video. I don't know. So, what is your role? I want you to think about this for a second. Just what are you expected to do as a tank? Chances are you may have thought that a tank's role is to make sure enemies are attacking you rather than other members of a group. Maybe you thought a tank's role is to protect the group from damage. Perhaps you thought, and this is a mindset despite what some people say, that a tank's job is to deal damage while tanking an enemy. No, none of these is what a tank's role is. A tank's role is control. You control the fight, the group, and the run in their barest essentials. You control where the enemies are. You control what enemies attack who. Through moving enemies, you control how the rest of the group moves. You can make your group speed up or slow down as they progress through an instance. You are the leader of the group, regardless of which person has a little crown above their unit frame. Remember that. Your role is to control the fight and the instance run so that your group succeeds. On top of this, you also have control of how your health goes up and down. Sure, you can't control every single attack an enemy makes, but you have a plethora of cooldowns available to you, and you can choose when to take less damage at pretty much any point during an encounter. Most tanks also have ways of healing themselves as well. The ability to control a fight extends far beyond just tanking enemies, however. What about enemies that can't be tanked, or that are being tanked by someone else, by another tank? You can still help control things. Stun things so that they can't damage your group. Interrupt enemies as much as you can. Slow them, root them, death grip them, reflect their damage. Anything you can do to wrest control of the fight into your own hands. Just because a mob can't be tanked doesn't mean that you can't control it. Always think about what else you can do to help keep things under control. The more things are under control, the easier a fight is going to be. So, think about that for a bit. Your mindset should be to control the fight that you're in. Make sure enemies are in a good location. Make sure your group members are in a good location, and if they're not, move yourself and the enemies to make your group members move. As long as it doesn't put the enemies in a bad location, you should be good to do that. Keep the damage on yourself by tanking the enemies, and use your cooldowns whenever you feel that they would best reduce damage. Control of a fight and an instance requires knowledge. This is the second part of the tank's mindset. In order to control the fight and the instance, you must know what the hell you're doing. There isn't really any way around it. Knowledge is one of the tank's greatest weapons. Know when the damage is going to come in so you know when to use your cooldowns. Know when to tank swap. Know what spells you can interrupt and do so. Know how a fight works. Know every single thing that you can so that when you jump into an instance, you know what to expect. Read and watch guides. Know what to expect from an instance, know how your class works, and know how other classes work. The more information you have, the better. The final part of being a great tank is to never, ever assume that you know everything. Take notes as you learn things, constantly try to stun things that you think may not be stunnable, interrupt things that you think you shouldn't be able to. Experiment. Always try to learn more and never assume that you know everything. Find the mistakes in how you control things and do your best to improve. This could be anything from positioning to communicating with your team. And make sure you do communicate with your group. Let them know your plan, and constantly do your best to control the fight. Okay, so we've discussed your mindset, how you need to try and control the fight, how you need to be knowledgeable, and how you always need to try to improve. Now let's discuss a few helpful tips for any tank. First of all, your character and your user interface. They are unbelievably important. Get yourself a solid UI that you are comfortable with. Have as much information on screen as you can in a clean and clear way. Know when your cooldowns become available, know when boss abilities are coming in, know the status of your group and how they're doing. But at the same time, you need to be able to see around you. More so than any other role, you need to be able to see everything. You need to be able to see that pack of ads walking towards the group, and you need to be able to see the great big bomb just underneath your feet. I've created a user interface guide that you can find by hitting the video on screen now. Don't worry, it won't close this video, it'll open in a new tab. You can also find a link in the description below. It should help you create a UI that you're comfortable with. Now onto your character. You have to be comfortable with it. By this I mean your keybinds and your movement. You need to have that stuff nailed down. Key bindings are important, but you can click if you want to. I know a very, very good tank who clicks, and he's comfortable with doing so. As long as you're comfortable with your character and you can react at a decent pace, it doesn't matter how you play. As long as you play your character as well as you can. Generally, key bindings will be faster than clicking, but if you are a good clicker, continue to be a good clicker and do well. That's all that matters. As for movement, you need to be able to move in specific ways. Because enemies will be targeting you, the way you move your character will affect the way enemies move. There are two main ways of moving. You can move on the usual WASD axis, so forwards, backwards, left and right. That's more important for the forwards and backwards than the left and the right. And you can strafe, which allows you to move diagonally. Enemies react differently towards these two ways of moving. So when you move backwards or forwards using the W or S keys, the server that you're playing on tells the enemy where you are, and they will move with you. So, for instance, if I am tanking an enemy and I backpedal, which is just moving backwards, they will move with me. If I move forwards, I will run through the enemy, they will turn around, and when I get out of range, they will start following me. When you strafe, the server acts a little bit differently. It will predict where you're going to go, and then tell the enemy to go there. This makes an enemy move faster than if they were just following you. So, if you need to move an enemy rapidly, you want to strafe. If you want to move an enemy at a controlled pace, you just want to backpedal. Tanking is one of the only roles where backpedaling is really good. So those are the two main ways of moving. However, there are a few movement-related tricks you can pull off using the mouse to control what direction your character is facing. For instance, let's say that we begin fighting an enemy that is directly in front of us, and the group is behind us. You want to turn that enemy around as quickly as you can, so that its back is facing the group. In most cases, this is the best way to tank enemies, as it protects the group from breath and cleave attacks while simultaneously allowing melee classes to attack from behind, which prevents them from being parried, which allows them to do more damage. You could easily strafe around the enemy and turn them. However, since you're not moving backwards or forwards to do this, the server will try to predict where you're going, and most likely the enemy will move in an awkward direction. Instead, you have to move forwards while constantly facing the enemy. Impossible, right? Eventually you'll just run through the enemy and it'll hit you from behind, which you can't dodge, parry, or block. Correct. So the answer is to always be facing the enemy while moving forwards. How do you do this? Jumping. Move forwards at the enemy, jump when you reach approximately the midsection of their targeting circle, and then use your mouse to rotate yourself so that you are constantly facing your enemy. This way, they'll turn and fight you with the very small amount of moving, and you'll not have to sacrifice a single bit of survivability. This can be really important when you're tanking lots of enemies or a single very dangerous enemy like a boss. Jumping also allows for some cool tricks to be done. For instance, let's say you're kiting some dangerous enemy and you're strafing away from them, but you want to use some kind of conal attack like Shockwave or Typhoon to make your life easier, or really any attack which requires you to be facing your enemy. You don't want to stop and turn though, or turn around and backpedal, which makes you move slower. So this is what you do. You jump, turn mid-air, cast the ability, and then turn back the way you were facing before you land. This way you don't lose any ground. This can be a little bit tricky to pull off, but it's a great way to turn and attack enemies while simultaneously keeping your movement controlled and fast. One other little trick. Let's say you're tanking an enemy and you want to move them backwards a little. Not much, just a little. You could jump through the enemy, turn, backpedal, and then repeat to get back into the same position as before. It would work. But this could be dangerous. What if the enemy cleaves, has a breath, or just needs to die super fast? You can't risk any of the melee's lives or their DPS. Instead, you move forwards, just a little bit. This only really works with enemies that have targeting boxes that you can see and that are fairly big. But if you can position yourself in the first third of an enemy's targeting box underneath their feet, chances are they'll take a step backwards in order to remain at a nice distance with you. This is a great way to control certain enemies when you need to keep them facing in a certain direction. Be warned though that if you go over their halfway mark, they will just turn you around and hit you from behind, which you don't want to do, and chances are they will then move in the other direction, which is even worse, so be careful. So, those are a few tips related to movement. Now let's discuss awareness. You need to be aware of what's going on around you, and you need to be able to predict what's going to happen. Take in everything around you and how it acts, including your group members. Do you have someone that pulls a lot? Well, keep an eye on them. Note at what distance enemies attack, so you'll know if you're going to get additional enemies during a fight. Look at the space around you and work out good paths in your head. Constantly think one step ahead so that you're ready for what's to come. Is a boss ability coming in soon? What do you have to do in order to control it? Use a cooldown? Face the enemy away from the raid? Go into the raid to split the damage? Turn your back to the boss? Start kiting? Think about what you're going to be doing next, and what's going to happen to the area around you next. Additionally, think about what effects your actions will have. For instance, there may be a pack of enemies nearby that you're not sure will attack the group or not. You could hope that they don't attack, or you could attack them yourself. Doing so would put you at an advantage, because it puts the control of the situation in your hands, because you will have aggro at the start. You will be able to predict the incoming damage, and the rest of the group will catch up to your way of thinking seconds later, rather than you having to catch up to the enemies destroying your healer. That would be bad. Playing reactively as a tank is not really for the best. You're going to want to think about what's coming up, what could happen, and what is happening at any one point in time. You need to be the guide that gets aggro as quickly as possible, because otherwise the group will suffer because you're not in control of the situation. Always be on top of things. This awareness extends to your own survival as well. When is damage going to be coming in, and what can you do to prevent it? When can you best use your cooldowns to help survive and make your group's life easier? What kind of cooldowns can you use? Maybe you could stun or interrupt an enemy instead of using a cooldown. Maybe you could cast a friendly spell on an ally, like Intervene or Hand of Protection, to save them, rather than focusing on trying to get the enemy controlled. Of course you want to do that second, but maybe you could save someone first. Use every single spell in your toolkit as much as you can. Never let a boss fight go by, especially in a raid, where you don't use every cooldown you have. One last thing to talk about now. Confidence. You need to be confident. You need to be able to pull the enemies before your group does, because chances are if you're timid, then they'll do the pulling instead, and you don't want that. Tanking is a very high pressure role, and if you're new to it, it can be very scary. If you do want to get into tanking, then start by being familiar with your class. Get your UI sorted, get your keybinds and your cooldowns sorted. Then jump in and start tanking. Try to off-tank first if you can, but if not, you just have to deal with it. It's a trial by fire, but if you get through it, you'll just get better and better, more confident, and you'll learn more and more. Overall, tanking is an absolutely awesome role. You control how the fight turns out, you control your group's success, and you stand toe-to-toe with the biggest, the meanest enemies in the game, and you survive. A great tank can make a run happen, and a bad tank can make it fail very easily. Mistakes will always be made by everyone in the group. Tanks are no different. So punish yourself if you make a mistake by trying to get better. Don't just say, oh, I'm terrible, I'll never get better, it's so horrible, I should reroll. No, figure out your mistakes, and constantly try to improve regardless of how much experience you have. My first ever raid was in Karazhan. I was the off-tank. In the first few pulls, I wiped the raid. They didn't kick me, they didn't yell at me, they knew it was my first time and they knew I was nervous. They said, this is what you did wrong, you can do it, get better. Say that to yourself, because I said that to myself, I made notes about what I did wrong, and then I did better, and we succeeded, and we got through Karazhan, and I got into raiding. Just remember that you can do it. You just need to have confidence in yourself, you need to be able to live up to your mistakes and get better. Do that, and you'll be smashing up bosses with your group for many years to come. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. I'm always after feedback, so let me know what you think. As always, if you want to have a discussion about any of the things I mentioned in this video, I will be more than happy to respond in comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck as the stalwart defenders of Azeroth.